Maybe that was one of the advantages of being known as a dedicated plain Jane, that your sex god of a boss would inevitably look through you as if you were part of the wallpaper, which left her free to do her job and work towards a brighter future, and to remind herself of Luis's many negative qualities, his selfishness, restlessness, and disregard for his own safety, as well as his annoying habit of leaving tiny espresso cups all around the house, which she was always finding in the most unexpected places. She reached the gym complex and hesitated for a moment, wondering if it might be better to wait until he had finished his massage. "Carly?" Had he heard her approaching, even though in these old sneakers her footsteps were practically silent? She knew it was said of Luis Martinez that his senses were as finely tuned as his cars, and one of the reasons why he had dominated the racing scene for so long. Still, she hesitated. "Carly, will you stop skulking around outside the door and get yourself in here?" His raised tone was arrogant and peremptory, and she guessed that some people would have found it offensive to be spoken to in such a way. But Carly was used to Luis Martinez by now. She knew what his entourage said about him, that his bark was worse than his bite, though she wasn't sure if that bit was strictly true. His last but one girlfriend had seemed rather fond of his bite. Why else would she have kept appearing at breakfast during her brief tenure as his lover, sporting bruises on her neck with a kind of joyful pride, as if she'd spent the night with some obliging vampire? Knowing that she couldn't put it off any longer, Carly opened the gym door and walked into the room where her famous employer was lying on his back on the narrow massage table. His dark head was pillowed on his clasped hands, and his golden olive body was outlined against the white sheet. His gaze alighted on her, and his black eyes narrowed with something which looked like relief. Which was weird. She thought that they tolerated each other pretty well, but there wasn't what you'd call any real affection between them. Or maybe it was not so weird after all. Quickly, she became aware of the tension in the room and of two things which couldn't go unnoticed. That Mary Houghton, the physiotherapist, was standing on the far side of the room breathing rather heavily as she stared fixedly down at her shoes. And that Luis was completely naked, save for the trio of small white towels which were strategically placed at his groin. A wave of colour swept into Carly's face, and suddenly she felt angry. Wouldn't it have been polite for him to have covered up before she arrived? Surely he must have known that it simply wasn't done to greet a member of your staff in such a way. That she might find it embarrassing to see that rippling chest and broad shoulders on display. Or that it was arrogant to flaunt those long, bare legs which were currently sprawled out in front of him. She kept away from men and all their complications, and with good reason. Experience had made her wary. But for once, all her latent fears and hang-ups about the opposite sex were put on hold as she stared at her boss with reluctant fascination. Looking at him now, it was easy to see why women adored him, why the newspapers had nicknamed him the Love Machine, when he'd been at the peak of his powers and motor racing champion of the world. Before her time, of course, but Carly had heard of him even then. Everyone had. His face had been everywhere, on or off the track. When he hadn't been standing on podiums, garlanded in the winner's laurels, and spraying champagne over the adoring crowds, he had been an advertiser's dream. Magnified images of Luis Martinez wearing expensive watches with that famously devil-may-care smile on his face were regularly emblazoned over giant billboards. Off-duty, his fascination had been equally compelling. Hunky South American billionaires always provided good copy, especially as he was rarely seen without the requisite blonde clinging possessively to his arm. And if some perceptive journalist